We'll speak to Henri Murison in just a second, CEO of the Northern Powerhouse, to get a view on what he's expecting. First, Kristian Niemietz is the editorial director and head of political economy at the IEA. Kristian, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
I said at the beginning, I don't think I've seen a budget where so much has been leaked and suggested and teased as this one. And it all seems to be rather troubling news. Do you think that's exactly what we're going to get tomorrow?
We will certainly get tax rises, yes. I mean, this is bound to happen because we've seen a big increase in public spending. If you compare to just before the pandemic, in 2019, public spending was about 40% of GDP. We've now gone up to about 46%. And that has to be financed in some way. We can't keep borrowing forever. I mean, bond markets are already signaling they no longer trust the British government in the way they once did. So it has to come from somewhere, and they're not going to cut spending. They're incapable of doing that because they have their own backbenchers against them. So something has to give.
Yeah, and it seems that in order to not raise income tax directly, I mean, they can move the threshold issue, which, by the way, is a tax rise, of course. But nonetheless, they've gone around and created, it appears to be a sort of smorgasbord of sort of smaller taxes, milkshake, and I don't know, there might be the caravan tax might reappear. The pasty tax might come back. Who knows? But it's that approach, it appears, she's going for, because she's scuppered, of course, by her own manifesto.
Yeah, these are desperate measures. They probably think that if they raise 100 small taxes, each of which is going to be trivial on its own, that nobody's going to notice that this is overall, of course, a big increase in taxes. But this is clearly because they've painted themselves into a corner with these manifesto promises of saying we will not raise taxes on working people. And what they will do now is, well, they will obviously raise taxes on working people, but just maybe not in their role specifically as workers. But of course, if the working person then, whatever, consumes a milkshake of something or something, it doesn't mean that they cease to be a working person. It's just that they will somehow try to shoehorn this into the promises they made so that they can say we are complying with the letter of our manifesto, but of course it is breaking the spirit.
Yeah. Is there something, when you look at this from an economic perspective, Kristian, what is it that you sort of are almost begging a Chancellor to do that, from your point of view, would provide growth, it would provide a good, healthy territory and terrain for an economy to grow? What is that thing? What does she really need to do in an ideal world?
Well, that is actually fairly simple, and they were already, at least rhetorically, in the beginning, they were on the right track when they said we want to be a government for the builders, not the blockers. So it's not so much tax measures, not so much fiscal measures that you would need in order to increase the growth rate. It's more about building houses, building offices, building pretty much anything, infrastructure, energy generation. And on that, okay, at least they're now talking about that, on making it easier to build nuclear power stations again, which is one of those things where, you know, I mean, this country used to be a pioneer when it comes to nuclear energy, and just by piling more regulation on top of it year after year, that energy, that industry has been pretty much destroyed. And initially, they were talking about growth measures on that front. So getting rid of the kind of regulation that holds back growth. That's actually fairly easy. That's where really where the big bottleneck is. It's too difficult to build anything. So this isn't so much about budgetary measures, fiscal measures. It's more about the right kind of deregulation. Just make it easier to build lots of stuff.
Is there going to be the so-called rabbit out of a hat at the end of this one? Is there going to be something where everybody has egg on their face and says, oh, God, that she really did do something amazing?
Well, as you said, pretty much everything has been leaked already, so I'd be surprised if there was anything left. But anyway, on purely on the fiscal measures, I'd say what they need is simply a credible commitment to go back to the fiscal situation more or less that we had just before the pandemic. I never thought that I would refer to 2019 as the good old days, because it didn't feel that way at the time. But we would be in a different place fiscally if we just had the fiscal measures, the macroeconomic measures that we had at the time. And they were initially briefly on the right track when they said we want to reform working age welfare, we want to make reforms to winter fuel payment. You know, the things where spending has gone up compared to 5 or 6 years ago, they were initially on the right track there, but then U-turned because they don't have their own backbenchers under control.
Indeed, and it is very much, it appears, have been written with those backbenchers in mind. Kristian, thank you for your time, sir. Appreciate that. Kristian Niemietz, editorial director, head of political economy at the IEA. The rabbit out of the hat. Many of you suggesting maybe she'll tax rabbits. That could. You promised me Bugsy, mummy. Yeah, but they're too expensive. It's a big old rabbit tax. Did you not hear? Who knows? Let's speak with Henri Murison, CEO of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership, former Labour advisor we've spoken to many times on the programme. Henri, good afternoon to you. Let's start with the rabbit. Do you think there is, not the rabbit tax, I just invented that, of course. Do you think there's likely to be something in this budget that we all have a little bit of egg on our face and go, do you know what? Actually, they played a blinder.
So I think there's always a challenge, isn't there, which is that the retail measures that are going to be popular aren't always easy to do.
Yeah.
And the hard things for which a government in the end will get rewarded, and future governments will benefit, people don't always notice. So much sort of unnoticed in the Chancellor's kind of over the cornflake speech a few weeks ago from Downing Street was that she did say that she wasn't going to cut capital budgets. And I think one of the challenges under the previous government is we did get those national insurance cuts, but they were essentially unfunded. There wasn't any money to pay for them. And the only thing they did in the last parliament to make them affordable was to cut capital investment. And the reason why we're in this anemic position, which I don't think your previous guest quite got to, is that the growth rate in the UK just isn't good enough. There are some city regions like Manchester who are delivering huge productivity growth over and above their kind of historical underperformance. But the UK as a whole just isn't growing enough. And that's why if you want to, for example, do something about the two-child limit, which the northern mayors, I think rightly have identified as a way that you could take a lot of people out of poverty. Gordon Brown, for example, has made a good case for it. In a good times, you could fund a measure like that out of the proceeds of growth. But instead, whether it's a gambling tax or something else, you have to find an offset for every kind of good giveaway you want to do. I do think there'll be lots of people watching who perhaps had 2 or 3 kids, maybe lost their job, maybe in a lower paid job than they were before. Because remember, half those people will benefit from the removing of the two-child limit on universal credit are in work. They are beneficiaries, right? And I think we shouldn't ignore the fact that many of those people whose kids are living in poverty are going to be better off this budget. And many of those people who are squealing about a mansion tax, for example, pay less council tax than people up north, right? Someone in London in an £8 million house in Westminster is paying £200 a year less than someone in a £150,000 house in Hartlepool. So a lot of people who are going to be paying this mansion tax are paying wildly less council tax than most people in the country. So I'm not going to cry any tears.
No, we all get that. I can remember
their council tax.
I can remember a time when I think Westminster had the lowest council tax in the entire country, and I always thought that was a bit weird, It
is weird.
But nonetheless, I mean, different councils, function in different ways depending on who's running them. So a lot of that has changed. You can wear more than one hat on these things as well, Henri, can't you? I mean, you can agree with the notion of something, but also understand the financial limitations with which we are currently working with. You identified it there when if there is no growth, then you're slightly scuppered as to how you can produce money, which leads us, I wonder, to maybe do we need to almost recalibrate our expectations of living, of life, of what the state can do for us? I mean, is that a new reality?
I mean, we have to realise, right, that never mind the ballooning welfare bill, and I have some sympathies to the fact that we probably need to get a limit on working age benefits in a managed way, right? Which is that what we want is to reward and to support people into work, not to have a benefit system that ends up essentially trapping people out of work, which is essentially what our current system does, that often people can't get out of it. But the most significant increase in cost over the last 2 decades has been the health service. We used to spend sort of 20 years ago about the same on health and education. Now we spend wildly more on health and not really enough on things like education, which obviously do in the end drive growth. Skills investment drives growth. So we're now going to be taxing universities 6% of all their international fee income to subsidise further education. Now, I want to subsidise further education. I just don't think that people who've scrimped and saved from Mumbai to come to this country to study are the people who should subsidise colleges where I am here in Bradford or anywhere in the north of England. So I just think you've got to look at this from the perspective of we do spend a lot on some public services that we all really value. And the reason they're expensive is we have an ageing population, and like every other country in Europe, we have to pay higher taxes if we want higher public services. In the UK, we have decent public services. We think they should be better, but we're often not prepared to pay more tax. And I think the difficult thing for the Prime Minister and the Chancellor is they promised something that they knew was very hard to deliver, right?
Yep.
Which was unless the UK economy started growing exponentially, despite all the underinvestment in infrastructure by the last government, they were going to be left with a choice between allowing public services to remain in the doldrums, the sort of austerity that Rachel Reeves has ruled out, and finding some tax increases from somewhere, and ruling out putting up corporation tax, ruling out putting up income tax, not putting up VAT, ruling out putting up national insurance. They just left themselves nowhere near enough wiggle room.
Yeah.
And so it would have been a lot easier for this government just to come out and argue earlier in the year that they needed to put up income tax to pay for raising the cost of defence, because that's the other thing that's happening. It's not just that the cost of welfare's gone up. It's not just that the cost of the health services every year in order to keep pace with demand going up. It's that we're also now having to rearm, which we haven't had to do since the Cold War. Do you mean my dad worked at the tank factory in Vickers? Suddenly we didn't need a tank factory in Leeds anymore because we weren't building any more Challenger 2s.
Yeah.
Now we are going to be needing tank factories and all these things again, which is going to create lots of jobs in many communities in the north of England, but it doesn't come for free. You've got to pay for that. So I think the honest truth of this is this government shouldn't have promised it could make public services better and keep everyone's taxes down, because the very wealthy can only pay so much. In the end, middle earners are going to have to pay more for decades to come if they want better public services. The triple lock probably isn't really affordable going forward. And it's mad that we've put up pensioners' money so much over the last few years in terms of their share of the welfare budget.
Yeah.
But the working age population, particularly of families, have seen very little increase. In fact, their benefits bill has gone down in relative terms, and whilst the pensioner population is getting a lot more money. So as long as we keep prioritising pensioners, as long as we keep wanting better public services, we are going to have to put up taxes if we also want to help the most vulnerable with children. And I do think it's hard to defend being against that. I just think it would be easier if the government had been more honest about the fact that it would have to put taxes up to pay for that group in society. And I think it's a defendable argument if you made it in a more open way. I think the problem with this government is they pretended that they could deliver growth quickly. The challenge is you can deliver growth if you invest for the long term, but it takes years and decades to see the benefit.
Of course.
We've invested for a country for so long that the inheritance of low growth from last kind of previous administration's decisions is one that this Chancellor just can't escape.
Okay. On that point, Henri, very thorough stuff. Thank you very much indeed for that. Henri Murison is the CEO of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership, former Labour advisor.